Hello, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you an enjoyable listening experience. Today, the book I'll be interpreting for you is called The Selfish Gene, authored by Richard Dawkins, a renowned British biologist who served as a professor at the University of Oxford and is a Fellow of the Royal Society. In 2005, he was selected as one of the top 100 most influential public intellectuals in the world by Foreign Policy magazine and the British magazine Prospect. Dawkins is known for his bold and groundbreaking ideas. In The Selfish Gene, he asserts that the world is governed by genes, and all living beings, including humans, are mere puppets of genes. This book sparked extensive debates in the scientific community. Supporters considered it a biological revolution with profound implications for our understanding of evolution. Critics argued that the theory was not only erroneous but also absurd, with potential negative consequences for society, particularly regarding notions of gene selfishness and the absence of free will in humans. Despite this controversy, Dawkins later clarified that the book primarily explores the influence of genes on the natural world throughout the billions of years since the emergence of life. He suggested that a more appropriate title for the book might be The Immortal Gene, as the term selfish carried excessive emotional baggage and unnecessary disputes. So, what exactly does this book discuss, and why has it had such a significant impact? Today, I will provide an overview of its three most critical sections. 1. Why genes are considered the foundation of the natural world. 2. How genes manipulate organisms to achieve their own preservation. 3. Whether humans can attain true freedom. Stay tuned for more insights into these intriguing topics from The Selfish Gene. Let's start with the first part. Why are genes considered the fundamental essence of nature? Genes are the smallest units of hereditary information, and Dawkins believes that all living beings are under the control of genes. Genes are the ultimate rulers of the natural world. Firstly, genes gave rise to all life forms. Scientists speculate that around 3 to 4 billion years ago, Earth was in its early stages of life's evolution. There were no true organisms, only simple chemical compounds like water, carbon dioxide, and ammonia. Then, through a series of accidental chemical reactions, these basic substances formed primitive organic compounds. The oceans contained numerous such organic molecules, often referred to as the primordial soup. Within this primordial soup, organic compounds interacted, and, by chance, life emerged. Among these interactions, a molecule capable of self-replication appeared, which we call a replicating gene. This replicating gene lacked emotions or thoughts. It blindly sought resources, aiming to replicate as much as possible. Occasionally, errors in replication created new genes. These distinct genes each replicated and gave rise to various gene pools, each striving for more replication opportunities, perpetuating themselves. Thus began the competition for limited resources. During this competition, genes discovered that by enveloping themselves with proteins, they could better protect themselves. This led to the emergence of the first living cells, acting as containers for genes. Gradually, genes started collaborating with other genes, enhancing their containers' capabilities through cell replication and aggregation. They explored various forms of cooperation, resulting in larger container sizes and increasingly complex systems. This led to organisms capable of self-sustenance, digestion, absorption of nutrients, and even thought processes. These organisms were essentially survival machines created by genes for the purpose of reproduction. Over billions of years, less successful survival machines were eliminated, while the most successful ones were preserved, evolving from simplicity to complexity, from lower to higher forms. This process eventually gave rise to the diverse array of plants and animals we see today. Genes not only created life but also controlled birth and behavior. Despite the vast increase in complexity and functionality compared to the initial cells, everything remained under the control of genes. These genes, minuscule in size, held power over life's complete information on how to construct survival machines and precisely transmitted this life information during reproduction. As new survival machines developed, they had to make their own decisions. On the surface, it appeared as if they were thinking, but in reality, it was the genetic code that dictated their actions. If the code was effective and helped survival machines adapt to natural selection, the individuals and populations thrived, and the genes achieved their goal of replication. Conversely, if the code's predictions about the environment failed, leading to wrong decisions, the survival machines perished, and the genes gradually diminished or disappeared. The phrase survival of the fittest fundamentally represents the competition between genes and the natural world. Genes congregated within their self-made survival machines, indirectly interacting with the external environment, making predictions and receiving feedback. During this process, survival machines had no say, they executed the genes' instructions precisely. Ultimately, the purpose of life is for genes to continue. Individual lifespans are limited, populations rise and fall, and over millions of years, countless life forms have come and gone. Yet, when organisms pass away, they leave nothing behind. The true meaning of life is to perpetuate genes. Life begins with genes, and after giving birth to the next generation, genes pass on their legacy to new organisms. The older generation completes its mission of passing on genes and ages or dies. Genes continue their journey with new generations, even if an entire species vanishes. Genes have, over the eons, passed themselves on to other species through evolution, hybridization, infection, and various means, ensuring their eternal existence. How long this journey lasts is beyond imagination. At this level, no living being can compare to genes. Life is transient and minute, while genes are eternal and immortal. From this part of the content, we can understand that genes created life and control their actions to achieve their own replication. In this process, humans and all organisms are merely survival machines controlled by genes, devoid of self-awareness. This is why genes are considered the fundamental essence of the natural world, the driving force behind the evolution of life, and the root of all natural phenomena. So, how do genes manipulate survival machines to achieve their own replication? Author Dawkins analyzes this in detail from 5 aspects of biological behavior: altruism, aggression, reproductive planning, standby warfare, and sexual conflict. This forms our second part, discussing how genes control organisms. The first way genes control organisms is through altruistic behavior. Altruistic behavior benefits others while offering no apparent advantage to oneself, often even sacrificing one's own interests. The book, The Selfish Gene, emphasizes that genes are highly selfish, with their sole purpose being self-replication. Survival machines under the control of genes take actions solely to enhance the chances of gene survival and replication. But how can these actions be altruistic? The key is to shift our focus from the individual organism to the genetic level. From a genetic perspective, altruism in organisms essentially serves the selfish interests of genes. When a survival machine carrying a certain gene is not the only one, sacrificing itself may benefit other survival machines carrying the same gene, increasing their chances of survival and reproduction. In this way, the gene gains more opportunities for replication and transmission. Selfish genes may sacrifice a particular survival machine for the greater genetic good. This theory challenges our conventional notions of love, family, and ethics, as it suggests that these are mere expressions of genes' ruthless drive for replication. To better understand this perspective, let's consider some examples Dawkins presents. He argues that when a mother sacrifices herself to protect her offspring, it isn't driven by what we commonly describe as maternal love. Instead, it's because the mother has already transmitted her genes to her offspring, and she may not have the chance to reproduce again. In contrast, the offspring, once mature, are highly likely to engage in mating and reproduction, making their lives more valuable in terms of gene transmission. Thus, genes influence the mother to sacrifice herself for the survival of her offspring. While individual factors like the mother's age and physical condition, as well as the likelihood of the offspring surviving on their own, may affect the optimal decision, the subconscious act of sacrificing oneself aligns with the selfish gene theory. Similar behaviors are observed in other species, such as worker bees sacrificing themselves for the hive's benefit or vampire bats regurgitating blood to feed starving companions. These altruistic behaviors, which we often ascribe to noble qualities, can be seen as benefiting genes transmission, in accordance with Dawkins' theory. The second way genes control organisms is through aggression, specifically measured in strategic aggression. In nature, active and violent conflicts leading to death are relatively rare among competing organisms of the same species. Such confrontations would be costly in terms of time, energy, and physical harm. Instead, organisms tend to engage in ritualized contests, which are more like competitions, governed by specific rules, involving threats and displays rather than lethal combat. These behaviors serve as strategies in the genetic game. Killing a rival may offer benefits, but it also incurs costs, such as injuries, energy expenditure, and the possibility of attracting other opportunistic rivals. The more complex the competition system, the less likely organisms are to engage in violent confrontations, as the relative costs and benefits become more intricate. This dynamic equilibrium between aggression and cooperation ensures that organisms do not resort to ruthless combat for survival. In human societies, individuals form alliances and abide by rules because they recognize that following these rules can yield long-term benefits. However, some individuals may prioritize short-term gains and violate alliances, causing temporary turbulence. Yet, society eventually reaches a new equilibrium through repeated negotiations, similar to the dynamic balance observed in nature. Economic theories, such as price cartels, provide examples of this dynamic equilibrium. Manufacturers may initially agree to maintain high prices for their products to benefit all, but as competition emerges, some may choose to undercut prices to gain an advantage. Gradually, smaller manufacturers drop out, leaving larger ones to re-establish high prices, maintaining the new equilibrium. This ongoing cycle reflects the restraint and strategic play of genes at work, optimizing the balance between cooperation and competition. The third way genes control organisms is through reproductive planning. Genetic replication depends on the mating and reproduction of survival machines. The more offspring produced, the more genes can be transmitted. However, in the natural world, organisms do not reproduce recklessly, they regulate their birth rates to maintain an optimal number. This is known as reproductive planning. If a species overproduces offspring, parents may struggle to provide enough food or care for them, reducing the chances of each offspring's survival and gene transmission. Thus, organisms strike a balance between the number of offspring and their capacity to nurture them properly. This optimal birth rate maximizes the potential for gene transmission. If environmental conditions change, organisms can adjust their reproductive strategies accordingly. For example, when a population of mice is kept in a controlled environment, their numbers increase rapidly at first but eventually stabilize. This self-regulation reflects genes' influence, preventing overpopulation and resource scarcity. Interestingly, some species exploit this mechanism to increase their own gene transmission opportunities. European cuckoos, for instance, lay their eggs in the nests of other bird species. The foster parents unknowingly raise the cuckoo chicks as their own. By doing so, cuckoos can reproduce more frequently, as they don't invest time and energy in raising their own offspring. This strategy is analogous to organisms that loudly vocalize to deceive potential competitors into believing that resources are scarce, leading them to reproduce less. These tactics, whether used by cuckoos or other organisms, demonstrate how genes manipulate reproductive planning for their own benefit. The fourth way genes control organisms is through intergenerational warfare. Parents raise their offspring to ensure the continuation of their genetic heritage, which is a shared interest. However, in families with multiple children, the interests of parents and offspring are not aligned, leading to intergenerational conflict. For parents, the resources they can provide during the process of raising children, such as food, energy, and time, are limited, and they must balance these against the associated risks. In order to pass on more genes, parents cannot evenly distribute these limited resources among all their offspring. Instead, they must make choices, allocating more resources to certain children to ensure their successful growth and reproduction, thus enabling the parents to pass on more genes to the next generation. From the perspective of offspring, they hope that parents will invest more resources in them to increase their chances of survival and growth, which will later provide opportunities to pass on their own genes. Since offspring depend on their parents for sustenance, parents hold the advantage in this conflict. Therefore, offspring employ various strategies to compensate for their disadvantaged position. One strategy is deception. For example, young birds may loudly vocalize and feign greater hunger than they truly are, hoping to deceive their parents into providing them with more food, which might have otherwise been distributed among their siblings. Another strategy is intimidation, where some young birds deliberately make loud calls to attract predators. To avoid danger, parents have no choice but to use food to silence the noisy offspring. There are even more ruthless methods, such as newly hatched cuckoos pushing other unhatched eggs out of the nest. In this intergenerational conflict, parents and offspring engage in a constant struggle for resources, with each party seeking to maximize its own genetic interests. This dynamic illustrates how genes manipulate this conflict to ensure their own replication and transmission across generations. The fifth way genes control organisms is through sexual conflict. Offspring inherit half of their genes from each parent, making their genetic interests equal. To increase their own genetic success, individuals often seek to reduce their investment in offspring, freeing up more time and energy to find opportunities to pass on additional genes. However, this results in the other parent having to invest more heavily, thereby losing opportunities to transmit more genes. This leads to a conflict between the sexes, as each seeks to manipulate the other into investing more in offspring. Naturally, there's an inherent inequality between the sexes. Males can produce a vast number of sperm daily and can impregnate multiple females in a short time, often without any parental investment. In contrast, females produce a limited number of eggs and typically invest significant time and effort in nurturing their offspring. This creates a situation where males tend to seek multiple mates, abandoning females, which is seen as exploitation. Females employ two main strategies to counter this inequality. The first is the good genes strategy, where females choose mates with superior genetic qualities in the hope that their offspring will inherit these advantages, increasing their chances of survival, reproduction, and attractiveness in mating competition. This is exemplified in species like the bowerbird, where females select mates with more extravagant displays. The second strategy is the parental investment strategy, where females carefully assess potential mates to determine if they are committed and willing to invest in the family. This includes behaviors like building nests, gathering resources, and showing dedication to the partnership. In this scenario, males who pass these tests are often rewarded with greater loyalty from females, as abandoning them would come at a higher cost. Swans, such as the mute swan, demonstrate this strategy well, with males actively participating in building nests and sharing in parental duties. The dynamics of human relationships, including courtship rituals, monogamous norms, and expectations of fidelity, are all influenced by these genetic factors. They reflect the evolutionary strategies developed by individuals to maximize their genetic success. These strategies are evident throughout the natural world, and even though human societies are complex, they are still shaped by these underlying genetic principles. So, can humans truly break free from these influences and attain genuine freedom? In the next section, we will analyze whether humans can truly achieve genuine freedom under the control of genes. The answer is yes, to some extent. While we have not completely liberated ourselves from genetic influence, there are at least 3 areas where humans have glimpses of freedom. The first aspect involves using scientific methods to resist genes' control over our mortality. As mentioned earlier, genes are inherently selfish, viewing human bodies as tools for gene transmission. Once the task of gene transmission is complete, the body loses its utility, and genes may activate mechanisms to lead to death, freeing up resources and space for new survival machines. However, what if the task isn't completed? Scientists have proposed 2 methods to counteract genes in this regard. The first method involves limiting the age at which humans can reproduce. If a universal rule were established that childbirth was only permitted after the age of 30, for instance, genes would strive to keep the survival machine alive until that age and beyond. This could potentially result in increasing human lifespans over time. Of course, this is more of a theoretical idea than a practical one. The second method is more realistic. Imagine if there were a substance produced by the body when young but gradually stopped being secreted with age. Genes determine whether the body is young and possesses a higher genetic transmission value by measuring the concentration of this substance. If this substance were identified and synthesized, injected into the body, could it deceive genes into thinking the body is still young and valuable for gene transmission, encouraging it to let us live longer and enjoy life to the fullest? The second aspect of freedom involves human willpower's ability to resist the instincts driven by genes. While humans are indeed gene-manufactured survival machines, we are unique due to our subjective consciousness, which enables us to some extent to overcome our instincts. For instance, reproduction is a biological instinct, but human society has seen the emergence of childless couples who choose not to have children and instead seek other meanings in life. Statistics show that more educated populations tend to have lower birth rates. Developed countries like Japan, Germany, and Sweden have even experienced negative population growth. This contradicts the desires of genes for reproduction, as individuals often prioritize reasons other than reproduction. Eating, sleeping, and ensuring the body has enough capital for mating and reproduction are biological imperatives dictated by genes. However, humans often exhibit behaviors contrary to these instincts. They may tighten their belts and diet despite having an abundance of food or continue working tirelessly in front of computers and smartphones, neglecting rest even when exhausted. Regardless of whether these habits are good or bad, they are actions driven by human autonomy and conscious resistance to instinct. This capacity for resistance continues to strengthen over time. Perhaps one day, we may break free from the control of genes and gain true behavioral freedom. The third aspect is resisting the genetic tyranny through cultural education. Genes have programmed a perfect sequence of actions for survival machines to follow. Since genes are inherently selfish, our nature dictates that humans are also self-reliant and rational beings in economics. Does this mean there's no hope for establishing a society where people cooperate generously, selflessly, and unconditionally with each other? Author Dawkins believes that through education, this is possible. Education can help us understand our biological foundation and the selfish behaviors it might drive us to perform. With this knowledge, we can prevent ourselves from engaging in the worst forms of excessive selfishness. Education can also enable us to see the long-term benefits beyond short-term gains and contemplate how to achieve greater success for the group. It can even nurture genuine, pure altruism, a form of selflessness unprecedented in the natural world. Although we are constructed as survival machines for genes, Dawkins is confident that we have the power to resist our genetic creators. In this world, only humans have the potential to rebel against the tyranny of self-replicating genes. To summarize, there are three efforts in the pursuit of human autonomy and liberation from genetic puppets: scientific methods to break free from genetic control over death, human willpower to resist genetic instincts, and cultural education to resist genetic tyranny. This is the destiny of humanity, to strive for autonomy on these three fronts. With this, we conclude the book. We have clarified Dawkins' perspective: genes are the fundamental force behind everything, creating all life, propelling biological evolution and reproduction, and controlling all behaviors of living beings. Humans are but puppets of genes. We've also explored how genes manipulate behavior in the areas of altruism, invasion, family planning, standby warfare, and sexual conflict. Lastly, we've analyzed whether humans have the potential to break free from the puppetry of genes. While we've glimpsed possibilities through science, willpower, and cultural education, the path to true freedom remains long. Nevertheless, it's this spirit of resistance that sets humanity apart from other species, making us the masters of wisdom and action. Thank you for listening to this book. Congratulations on completing another one. We appreciate your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, and goodbye.